So tell me, do you think that the microplastics problem, microfibers shedding, is so big that it may be impossible to solve?
I think part of it comes down to our current understanding as well. So right now there's so many unknowns that it definitely can look impossible. But at the same time, knowing that we are focusing on really kind of uncovering those unknowns and trying to really get to impact, once we have a better idea of impact, that kind of sets the limits by which we can look to. We'll probably never get to zero emissions, but can we get to a level of impact that is manageable, that isn't adversely harming the ecosystem?
How can the industry best measure the amount of pollution that the textile microfibers may be responsible for?
So I think this is where we really need a standardized test method approach to be able to, looking at a material level, starting at a material level, how do we quantify how much lint and fiber is being released? We know it's happening. We know it depends on the fiber construction and so many elements that it's going to be very difficult to model to say, aha, I've got a model that I now know without doing testing. So we're going to need some sort of test method to really enable us to benchmark and say this is okay and this one's not, and especially across different fiber uses, what is acceptable? How do we actually turn this into a quality metric as we have so many other aspects of materials?
Do you think this is a widespread industry problem, or do you think it's more just linked to the synthetic fiber side of our industry?
I think this problem, again, it comes a little bit down to the scoping. It really does affect all of us at this point. Certainly there's going to be different elements in terms of what persistence looks like for natural fibers versus synthetics. With synthetics, we can basically already take that off the table in terms of it's persistent. You know, these plastic particles are persistent, so persistence is known. But looking at the different ways that those particles can impact organisms, as a structural pollutant, certainly natural fibers, if they're not degrading, will show the similar characteristics. Looking at how we treat natural fibers to give them performance attributes, that generally has some persistent chemistry associated with it. And when it's not persistent chemistry, there may even just be plastic as part of that. So as we do resin treatments or things, that can introduce more plastics at a level that we just haven't even thought about, right? We've broken it down to microplastics, but now we're talking about nanoplastic particles, and are we substituting one problem for another? So really trying to find a test method or some way to measure everything, and then going, we know that different fiber types will show different shedding characteristics, and over time, hopefully we get to the impacts by fiber type, by fiber treatment, so that we can really start to hone in, okay, we don't have to worry about these ones as long as they're below this level. These ones are actually more critical to get down to maybe a lower threshold.
You may have implied this, but we're not really sure, are we, even at this point, at the aggregate level, what percentage of the problem is caused by the textile industry, do we?
Correct. I think we still have a long ways to go in terms of really getting down to how much is our industry responsible for. Certainly there's some elements around looking at the wastewater treatment release and where we're seeing fibers and the work done around laundering studies where we're finding that these generate many plastic particles. We know that we are part of the problem. And I think whether it's 5% or 50%, really, to me, and I think to many in our industry, it's saying, but is there something we can do now, and let's get ahead of this problem let's not drag our feet and try to make it something that we now have to wait 10 more years before it's proven that we're the bad guys in the room.
If you only could choose one thing that you think by doing that would seriously accelerate the work to improve and address this problem, what would that be?
I think really getting that test method out and used is going to be a big part of it, really getting to at least product level impacts. The other piece that I think we really want to start thinking more about is the chemistry aspect. If we're using, because persistence is really what we're trying to tackle here. We're tackling persistent macromolecules at kind of that mid structure, not massive structure, but still at the microstructure stage. We're tackling persistent particles. But as we look to tackling persistent chemistry that can attach to those fibers or are embedded in those fibers, that's something else that we're going to have to tackle, and I think really chemicals management plays a big role there. one other piece that I neglected to mention earlier, I think that we talk about the product impacts of where these come in terms of textile impacts that we see from a product level in terms of testing the materials to figure out as you wash it how much microfibers are being generated. The other corresponding piece that our industry is responsible for is the textile manufacturing piece of that. If we're doing processes and processing in manufacture that's generating microfibers, what's happening to that? So probably the use phase is going to be a significant driver, but the manufacturing phase will also play a role, and how we look at that in the future. We haven't started to tackle that directly yet. I think the European Outdoor Group is looking at some of that side of things, but those are the two main areas that we have the potential to leverage.